You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're listening to Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find out my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Well, since I last talked to you on this podcast, a lot has happened when it comes to Carlos Correa. The signing is on hold. The sides are negotiating, and we don't know yet if he will, in fact, become a Met. So we're just going to go through the reporting that's out there, what we believe is going to happen, and also how concerned should the Mets be about this leg injury with Carlos Correa. Is this something that could really be a terrible move by this franchise if they were to sign him to a contract that spans longer than a decade? We're going to go through all of that, but I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, I'm recording this at about 6:30 p.m. on Sunday. Belated Merry Christmas to you all and a Happy Hanukkah. But I'm assuming at this point we will not know by the time we wake up in the morning on Monday if Correa will be a Met or not. Now, that assumption could be dead wrong, and as you're listening to this, you could already know that a deal is finalized, but it does not really change the overall tenor of this podcast, because even if we find out that there's just been a bunch of added framework into the contract, but Correa is still a Met on a 12-year deal, or if it's a 10-year deal, or it's an 8-year deal, whatever this deal ends up being, there's obviously risk here. That's clear. Because if there was no risk, for one, he'd probably be a Giant, right? There's something here. It's not like there's nothing. So let's just go through what the injury is. Because now at this point, we've been able to at least pinpoint what happened. Because when it fell through with the Giants, there was a lot of confusion as to what was going on here. Various reports at this stage have mentioned that Carlos Correa's right leg is the issue. Now, this is from an injury dating back to 2014. Correa did not debut until 2015. So he was then 19 when he fractured his right fibula and sustained minor ligament damage playing in high A. That injury required arthroscopic surgery or arthroscopic... Oh, geez. This is why I did not go to med school. Third time's a charm. Arthroscopic... We'll go with it. Surgery to repair the damage, and they put a plate into his leg. Now, there was a point this season where that plate was mentioned by Correa, where he had a play where he said, the guy just hit my plate. It was vibrating, and I was nervous for a second, but when I was able to move it, I was fine. That sounds a little bit bad. You're a little concerned. What does a plate mean? Does it break down? Does it wear down over time? I am not a doctor. Clearly, you just heard me try to pronounce arthroscopic. Maybe I did a better job that time. But you look at his career, he has never sustained a leg injury as a big leaguer that has kept him off the field. So before we even get into the Mets side of this, how frustrating does this have to be for Carlos Correa? I mean, that's really where I want to spend some time here, because can you just imagine what it's like to be Carlos Correa right now? I mean, yeah, sure. You could say, I'd love to be Correa. He's about to get a contract of 3. Yes, of course. If any one of us could sign up for Correa's problems instead of our own, fine. But you look at a player who has done everything right as far as what it takes to get paid. 8-year big league career. You know, he's hit 279, 357 on base, 479 slugging, an all-star 2 times, won a Rookie of the Year, won a Gold Glove, has, 18 home runs in the postseason, won a World Series, one with an asterisk, but still won one. Goes out in his first contract year in 2021, puts up great numbers, wins a platinum glove, heads out as the top shortstop in the market, knowing that his good friend Francisco Lindor, an offseason prior, cashed in on a $341 million contract. He's trying to top it. He's trying to get that big deal. Corey Seager jumps on the money first, signs for $325 million, 10 years. All right, there's enough money to go around. Marcus Semien, another potential shortstop, although obviously he moved to second base in Toronto and stayed there when he joined Seager, but he gets, his bag. You go through that offseason, trying to remember if there's another shortstop. Javi Baez, Trevor Story, they get long-term deals for 9 figures. He ends up being the last one standing, and he decides to go the high AAV route. So he signs a bet-on-yourself deal with the Twins, 3 years with an opt-out. Sets the record for the most money a shortstop will ever make in a single season by topping Lindor's 34.1. Goes out and balls out. I mean, yeah, the Twins weren't great, and his numbers maybe aren't quite as good as they were the year prior, but he still hit .291. He still got on base at a .366 clip. He still slugged at a .467 clip. He hit 22 home runs in 136 games. The time that he missed this year was due to COVID and a finger injury where he got hit by a pitch. He can look at his career, and granted, he did miss time in 2017, 2018, and 2019. But those were back injuries. These were not leg-related injuries for any of it. In the last 2 years, he's been healthy. Really, the last 3 years, because he played 58 games out of 60 in 2020. You get to that point in your career where you sign a 13-year deal for $350 million. You fly your whole family and your wife's family out to San Francisco. You pass the physical, but there's the concern about the long-term viability. He didn't fail the physical. It was a difference of opinions between what Boris and Correa feels about his health and what the doctors are saying, which is just probably that when you got a guy who's got a leg with a plate in it, how is that going to hold up for 13 years? But also, are players ever going to be healthy for a 13-year deal? So it's just one of these things where you can't fault the Giants. You can't fault the Mets. But you have to feel bad for Carlos Correa, because now twice he has thought that he had $300 million locked up in a bank. And he has yet to get that opportunity to finally put pen to paper and sign on the dotted line. And boy, if this does reach that resolution and he gets to sign a contract worth that much money, how much relief is there going to be for Carlos Correa? I feel bad for him, I really do. But also, you can't fault the Mets in this. Just like you can't fault the Giants either. But the Mets have put themselves between Steve Cohen's comments and just their overall offseason and the push to be as clear of a favorite as possible, to go into the season with no holes on their roster. The alternative of not signing Carlos Correa could force the Mets' hands to make sure they sign this deal, but that could also mean some bad things when it comes to the future of the Mets. Could this be a massive albatross in the future? We're going to discuss that in just a minute. First, though, today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for your sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. They've got it all at BetOnline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. BetOnline is always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. I would recommend you hold off right now on betting on the Mets to win the World Series or to win the pennant, because while their odds are showing how they are favorites, those might change if Correa ends up not being a Met. So right now, plus 625 Astros. The Mets are ahead of the Dodgers when it comes to being a favorite to win the World Series, probably because a lot of money has been coming in on them. It's at plus 700. Dodgers are at plus 750. The Dodgers and the Mets are both at plus 350 to win the National League. If you want to check out those odds or more, head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action BetOnline, where the game starts. Should Steve Cohen have left this all alone? Should he have stayed on the sidelines, let Billy Epler do the due diligence on it, not spoken to the New York Post about the deal before everything was finalized? There's a lot that has been discussed since this has all unfolded, and I feel like there is some out there who would like Steve Cohen to look bad, who would like this guy who was spending crazy, as they would say, look like an idiot for making this move, for being this bold. Well, here's the thing. What the New York Mets did by having Steve Cohen strike a deal with Scott Boras is they now have exclusive negotiating rights with Carlos Correa. And I credit Howie Rose, too, because he's the one who did mention this on Twitter. So, of course, Howie, voice of the Mets, always love his take. And I agree with him for sure. Striking the agreement, in principle, puts you in position to have Carlos Correa as your starting third baseman. Nothing wrong with that. Should Steve Cohen have spoken directly to John Heyman and allowed him to use those words in the Post? Probably not. Probably not. Because in some respects, Ken Rosenthal of The Athletic did say that this could lock the Mets in because Major League Baseball tells their owners and their GMs and everyone else in those front offices to avoid speaking publicly about a deal before it's finalized. That's why when Billy Epler goes on Mets hot stove after Justin Verlander signed, he says, I cannot discuss the player, but if we were to get a veteran pitcher, we like the pedigree. It's just making sure you don't overstep somewhere and it comes back to haunt you. And in this instance, theoretically, it could. Steve Cohen will learn those things. His intent is in the right place. He wants the Mets to win, and they are in a better position than anyone else in baseball right now to land Carlos Correa next season. But the problem is, what are you landing? Well, here's what I'd say. Last 2 years, the guy's been healthy. He's been one of the best players in baseball. You are trying to win right now. The injuries that he sustained throughout his career that have made him a little bit more injury prone. It's been thumb injury, back injury, rib issues. Nothing with the leg. The New York Mets have to figure out a contract that works for them. I don't see the principles of the deal changing too much in that I still believe it's going to be north of $300 million. And I think it'll be still, a decade-long contract. I think the only thing that could happen here is maybe you see it reworked down from 12 to like a 10-year deal. And that could be it. But that could also mean maybe it's 10 for $300. Maybe he gets, I guess Trey Turner got, 11 for $300? Maybe that's what it is. I really don't know. But I think overall the money's not going to change too much. It's more going to be the language behind it. And there's been a couple contracts that have been discussed as maybe parameters for what we could see here. There's the Pudge contract from years ago where Ivan Rodriguez got a deal, and if there was some spinal injury that flared up, that contract could be null and void. There's a similar stipulations put into JD Martinez's contract with the Boston Red Sox. Now, JD Martinez is interesting because I was actually going back and forth a little bit with somebody on Twitter on this where they said, JD Martinez, it was a 5-year deal, not a 12-year deal, which I do agree with, but you're looking at that contract and how it panned out and what Correa's track record is. JD Martinez's injury history prior to signing with the Red Sox was more concerning. The guy had only played over 123 games once. He played 158 games, was an All-Star in 2015. Other than that, he had never been an All-Star. He had never played more than 123. He played 123 games in 2014. And then every other year was 120 or less. He just never could stay completely healthy. Goes to Boston in 2018. Plays 150 games. Drives in 130. This is, again, with the stipulations in the contract that if the foot injury were to flare up, the Red Sox would be able to get off the hook a little bit. He's fourth in MVP. He won a Silver Slugger. 2019, he played 146 games, drove in 105. 2020, played in 54 of the 60 games. Didn't have a great season offensively, but he was still on the field. 2021, played in 148 games, was an all-star again. He also led the league with 42, was that doubles? Yeah, 42 doubles. Okay, following season, this past year, 2022, played in 139 games, 43 doubles. Put up good numbers. Point being, that contract, which was considered a big scare for the Red Sox, the guy was healthy for the entire thing, and actually healthier than he had ever been. Now, I'm not saying that Carlos Correa, because JD Martinez, who was a couple years older, was able to stay healthy, that means Correa will. But what I am saying is, these doctors are trying to forecast and look into the future with their crystal ball about what's going to happen, and not really taking into account what we've seen, which is the fact that this injury has not limited Correa to this point. And not trusting that he can stay on the field and can continue to take care of his body. I really believe that Carlos Correa is worth the risk here. Now, you have to make sure you protect yourself if you're the Mets. But I don't think you have to suddenly say, now we're only comfortable going to an 8-year deal. I think you can still sign him to a 12-year deal. Just make sure that if his leg just suddenly stops working 6 years in, you don't have a dead salary on your books for the latter half of the contract. If you miss a full season, then the Mets can buy you out of the remainder of your deal. I don't know how they can structure it. I really don't. But I would work with Boris and get a deal done. And I think what's happening right now, again, assuming nothing breaks before I actually put this up, is that these sides are going to be working through it. But it was Christmas and they're taking their time. It's just not something that they could get done immediately. But I feel like they're going to find a way to come to terms here. If they don't, it's going to look bad for both sides. So I'm going to discuss what could go wrong if everything falls apart. Where do the Mets go from here? We'll discuss that next. But first, another word from our sponsors. So what if Carlos Correa is not a Met? What if they just can't get over their concerns? They let it all go. Well, once again, everyone will take the opportunity to say the Mets are stupid. Then again, even if they sign him, people are going to say that. So you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. From Correa's perspective, good luck getting a 9-figure, $250+ million contract if it's not with the Mets at this point. Because then 2 organizations have turned you down, and he's just in this terrible position. But that also doesn't mean you sell yourself completely short either. So it's a weird spot to be in right now for Carlos Correa. For the Mets' perspective, okay, let's just say you decide to pass on it. Scares you too much. Well, now, instead of being comfortable letting your prospect grow into roles, Brett Baty's got to break camp with the team. And he might be your starting third baseman. Otherwise, it's Eduardo Escobar. And the two of them are manning that position. You don't have a Correa. So now, suddenly, wait a minute, that outfield where we thought maybe Brett Baty could kind of be an elevator for you in left field, that's off the table, likely. What's left in free agency? Oh, Michael Conforto, Brandon Drury, they're signed. Yes, you can still get an Adam Duvall. You can get an AJ Pollock. But a lot of these bats have gone. So the Mets really, while I still think have a roster that even without Carlos Correa, perfectly capable of winning the NL East, perfectly capable of going on a run. You just end up more disappointed, though, because you thought there was that one last star. And then to try to get them, try to get one, do you hit the trade market? Well, what do you have to trade that doesn't hurt to give up? Obviously, you're always comfortable. If you get a good player, you have to be made a little uncomfortable about who you have to trade. But moreover, when you look at their farm system and what they wanted to do here, a big part of all the moves they've made is to protect and hold on to those top prospects. I really believe that there's just too much to be lost on each side for a deal not to come together. But we're in this waiting game. And once it does come together, I know there's going to be fans that say that contract is too long. This guy's going to break down for sure. We don't know anything. We don't. And the guy has been able to stay on the field despite having this injury for the entirety of his career. So there's no guarantee that all of a sudden his leg's going to fall off and it's impossible that he ever plays Major League Baseball for a sustained long period of time again. That's just ridiculous. This guy could end up being very healthy and a great Met for a long time. We just have to wait and see what the Mets decide to do here. But I do not fault the organization at all for making the splash or for doing their due diligence before confirming it and making it all official. So we'll see what happens here in the Carlos Correa saga. That's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today, hosted by Peter Bukowski. Locked On Sports Today is where you want to go to stay up to date with everything going on around sports. You can follow it on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get podcasts.